Welcome back to Crimson Secrets. Before we get into tonight's story, drop a comment below and tell us what city you're watching from. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. We post stories every week, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming. Now, let's talk about what happens when a woman who has been quietly holding everything together finally decides to let it all fall. Right on the people who deserved it most. The document arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped under the door of Nathalie Ashworth's corner office, on the 31st floor of the building that bore her family's name. She almost didn't notice it. She had been standing at the window, with her coffee going cold in her hand, watching the city move below her. The yellow taxis, the pedestrians with their heads down, the whole ordinary machinery of a world that had no idea was inside this building, inside her marriage, inside the past 4 years of her life, which she was only now beginning to understand had been built on a foundation. Someone else had been quietly dismantling, one brick at a time. The envelope was cream-colored, unmarked. No return address, no name on the front, just slid under the door like someone wanted her to find it, but didn't want to be the one to hand it to her. Nathalie Ashworth was 44 years old. She had dark hair she wore, pinned back during the day and let fall at night, and she had the kind of posture that came not from confidence, but from years of being watched and deciding early on that she would never give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. She had built Ashworth Capital from a regional investment firm into one of the most respected private equity houses on the East Coast. She had done it through 18-hour days, and instincts so sharp they sometimes frightened even her. She had done it while raising 2 children, managing a household in Connecticut, and being by every external measure the perfect partner to her husband of 16 years. She picked up the envelope. Inside was a single photograph and a note that said only, "She wore it to the Whitmore Gala last spring. I thought you should know." Nathalie looked at the photograph for a long time. It showed a young woman, early 20s maybe, with long copper hair and a dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent, standing in the marble lobby of the Whitmore Hotel. The young woman was laughing at something just off camera. She had one hand raised to her collarbone, drawing attention, whether consciously or not, to what hung around her neck. It was a brooch. Antique gold, set with a cluster of sapphires and one central diamond. The kind of piece that looked almost casual on a young woman who didn't understand what she was wearing. Nathalie understood exactly what it was. She had last seen it 3 years ago, when she had opened the wall, safe in their Connecticut home, to retrieve some documents and noticed it was missing. She had assumed at the time that she had moved it somewhere and forgotten. She had looked for it, quietly, and then set the question aside the way she had learned to set aside the things that troubled her. Carefully in a place she could return to later, when she had more information. She now had more information. She set the photograph on her desk, face up. She set her coffee down beside it. She sat very still for approximately 45 seconds. Then she picked up her phone and called her attorney. Her husband's name was Bennett Hale. He had kept his own last name when they married, which Nathalie had not minded at the time. She had thought it was a sign of a certain independence she admired. Now, she thought it was the first indication, which she had simply not known how to read, that he had never fully arrived into their life together, that some part of him had always kept a door open. Bennett was 49, handsome in the way that men of a certain income and carelessness sometimes are. Not because they work at it, but because the world has always been easy enough for them that they've never had to. He had a wide smile and a habit of touching people's arms when I talked to them, and people generally liked him immediately and trusted him. Nathalie had once thought this was one of his gifts. She now understood it was a tool. He was, on paper, the co-managing director of Ashworth Capital. In practice, he managed relationships. He took clients to dinner. He played golf. He attended the kinds of events that required a good suit and an easy laugh. These were not nothing. Nathalie had never pretended they were nothing, but she had also never pretended they were equivalent to what she did, which was everything else. The brooch had belonged to her grandmother, Estelle Ashworth, who had brought it from England when she immigrated at 22 years old, with almost nothing else. It was, by any sentimental accounting, priceless. By Ashworth's accounting, it was worth approximately $380,000. Natalie had kept it in the safe in the Connecticut house, along with certain other documents and a small amount of physical cash. The safe combination was known, she had believed, only to her. She had given it to Bennett once, 7 years ago, when she had needed him to retrieve something while she was traveling. She had changed the combination afterward, she had thought. The attorney's name was Suzanne Park, and she had been Natalie's lawyer for 11 years. When Natalie called, Suzanne picked up on the second ring. "I need you to start pulling financial records," Natalie said. "Joint accounts. The Connecticut properties Bennett set up in 2021. I want to know everything." A beat of silence. "How long?" Suzanne asked. "As long as it takes. But I suspect we're looking at 3 or 4 years. Natalie." Another pause. "Are you all right?" Natalie looked at the photograph on her desk, at the brooch her grandmother had carried across an ocean, at the young woman who had no idea what she was wearing. "I will be," she said. His name, the young woman's it turned out, was not a young woman at all, in the sense Nathalie had imagined. She was 26, which felt very young to Nathalie, who was 44, and not young at all to Nathalie, who remembered 26 with perfect clarity. Her name was Delia Foss. She worked in marketing. She had, according to the research Suzanne quietly commissioned over the following 2 weeks, been with Bennett for approximately 14 months. Natalie processed this information the way she processed most difficult information. By continuing to work, to attend meetings, to make decisions, to smile at the right moments and be serious at the right moments, and give no indication to anyone that the ground beneath her feet had become something other than solid. She was very good at this. She had always been very good at this. It was not, she had come to understand, necessarily a virtue. The financial records, when Suzanne sent them, told a story that was both more and less surprising than the photograph. More, because the amounts were larger than she'd expected. Less, because once you knew where to look, the pattern was so obvious she couldn't believe she hadn't seen it before. Over 3.5 years, Bennett had moved just over $2.1 million out of accounts and structures in which he had technical co-signatory authority. Not all at once. Never all at once. Small amounts, irregular intervals, the kind of movement that looks like ordinary operational expenses, if you trust the person who controls the reporting. Nathalie had trusted the person who controlled the reporting. She sat with the documents for a long time, one evening in the Connecticut house, after Bennett had gone to bed. The house was quiet in the way that large houses are quiet, full of small sounds, the hum of the refrigerator, the settling of the structure, the faint noise of the road a half-mile away. She had loved this house once. She had chosen every room, every surface, every detail. She had imagined growing old here. She closed the folder and put it in her bag. She did not cry. This is not because she did not want to. She did somewhere beneath the part of her that had learned, long ago, to keep the surface calm. But she had made a decision, somewhere between the photograph and the financial records, that she was not going to spend what came next in. She was going to spend it in action. She just needed to wait for the right moment. The right moment arrived in the form of the Whitmore Foundation's annual Founders Gala. The Whitmore Gala was, for the kind of people who attended it, the event of the season. 50 tables, black tie, the grand ballroom of the Whitmore Hotel. The same lobby where an anonymous photographer had captured Delia Foss in a brooch that didn't belong to her. The foundation supported arts education and had been a long-time institutional partner of Ashworth Capital. Nathalie sat on the advisory board. She had attended every year for the past 11 years. This year she had RSVP'd for 2. Bennett had confirmed he would be there. He had no reason to suspect anything. As far as Nathalie had no idea about Delia, no idea about the brooch, no idea about the money. He had, as far as Nathalie could tell, been operating with the comfortable confidence of someone who has not yet been caught and has begun to believe he never will be. What Bennett did not know, what almost no one knew, was that Delia Foss had also been invited to the gala. Not by Bennett, by the foundation's events coordinator, who had received an anonymous donation and a request to add 1 additional seat to table 12. Nathalie had a friend on the foundation board, the kind of friend who, when Nathalie explained the situation in quiet and precise terms, over coffee 3 weeks earlier, had said, "Tell me what you need." She had told her what she needed. The night of the gala, Nathalie wore midnight blue, long sleeves, deep neckline, the kind of dress that doesn't announce itself but becomes impossible to look away from once you notice it. She wore her hair down. She wore her grandmother's pearl earrings, not the brooch, obviously, and carried a small clutch that matched her shoes exactly. She arrived alone. Bennett had texted to say he was running late, some client dinner that was running long. He would meet her there. She walked into the ballroom and found her table, and sat down, and picked up her water glass and looked around the room with the kind of attention that appears, to the casual observer, to be idle. It was not idle. She was cataloging every entrance, every face at every table, every door. Delia arrived 40 minutes into the cocktail hour. She was wearing gold, a backless gown that suited her youth without apology, and she had her copper hair loose around her shoulders. She looked uncomfortable in the way that people look uncomfortable when they're somewhere slightly above their social altitude. Compensating with a posture that's too straight, a smile that's working too hard. She was not wearing the brooch. Nathalie noted this. She had expected it. The photograph was from a year ago. It was possible the brooch had since been sold, or put away, or that Delia had been advised by Bennett not to wear anything conspicuous. What Nathalie had not expected, and this was the moment she would think about later, the one that broke something open in her chest that she had been keeping very carefully sealed, was the expression on Delia's face when she spotted her. Delia knew who Nathalie was. Of course she did. And the expression that crossed her face was not defiance, not malice, not even guilt exactly. It was something closer to shock, and then something closer to shame, and then something that looked, briefly, like the very beginnings of relief, as though some part of Delia Foss had been waiting for exactly this moment, this room, this reckoning. Nathalie held her gaze for 3 full seconds. Then she smiled. Not the smile that reaches the eyes, not yet, and looked away. Bennett arrived at 8:15, just as the first course was being cleared. He came through the main entrance and stopped to shake hands with someone near the door, and Nathalie watched him from across the room. He was wearing his good navy suit, and he had that ease about him, that practiced social ease, and for one disorienting second she could see exactly who he had been when she met him, the version of him she had fallen in love with, and she felt the loss of that alongside the fury, both at once, which is the particular cruelty of betrayal. He found their table. He sat down beside her and kissed her cheek. Sorry, he said. The Farland dinner ran long. You look beautiful." "Thank you," Nathalie said. She watched his face as he scanned the room. She saw the exact moment he saw Delia at table 12. The scan that stopped, the half-second recalibration. The way he very deliberately looked somewhere else. "Great turnout," he said. Nathalie agreed. She let the dinner proceed. She talked to the couple on her left about their recent trip to Portugal. She talked to the Foundation's executive director about the literacy program expansion. She ate her food. She drank approximately half a glass of wine. She was aware, at every moment, of Bennett beside her, performing his own version of calm, and of Delia at table 12, who was barely eating. At 9:30, Nathalie excused herself. She walked, not toward the restrooms, but around the perimeter of the ballroom, to table 12. She pulled out the empty chair beside Delia Foss and sat down. Delia stared at her. The people at the rest of the table, mid-conversation, paused. "I'm Nathalie," she said pleasantly, to the table at large, as though she had simply run out of space at her own table. "I don't think we've all met." She turned to Delia. "And you're Delia. I've heard wonderful things about your work with the Harmon Group." The lie was smooth. It had the desired effect. Delia could not tell whether Nathalie knew everything or nothing. "Thank you," Delia said. Her voice was steady, but her hands, which were in her lap, were not. "I have something for you," Nathalie said, quietly, enough that only Delia could hear. She reached into her clutch and placed, on the table between them, a small photograph. Not the original, a copy. The lobby photograph from last spring, the brooch clear and unmistakable. Delia looked at it, then she looked up at Nathalie. "I want you to understand something," Nathalie said, still pleasant, still quiet. That piece belonged to my grandmother. She carried it across the Atlantic in 1941. It's the only thing I have left of her." She paused. "I don't blame you for not knowing that, but I need it back." For a moment Delia didn't speak. Something moved behind her eyes, calculation, perhaps, or conscience, or both. Then she said, "I don't have it with me?" "I know," Nathalie said. "I'd like you to arrange to have it returned by Friday. You have my contact information." She placed a card on top of the photograph. "I'm not interested in making your life difficult, but I am interested in that brooch." She stood. She smoothed her dress. She looked down at Delia Foss, who was 26 years old and was sitting in the ballroom of the Whitmore Hotel, fully understanding. For perhaps the first time, the true weight of the situation she had placed herself in. "Enjoy the rest of your evening," Nathalie said. She went back to her table. She sat down. She picked up her water glass. Bennett looked at her and she looked back at him. And in his face she could see the dawning awareness. Not certainty, not yet, but the first cold draft of it. "Who were you talking to?" he asked. "Someone from the foundation," she said. "Nothing important." It was important. It was, in fact, the beginning of the end of this version of her life she had been living. But she had time. She had already done the work that mattered. What happened next took approximately 3 months. Suzanne Park filed the legal action on a Wednesday morning. The complaint was 41 pages long and detailed with documentation. The transfer of $2.1 million from accounts in which Bennett had co-signatory authority, but not sole ownership. It named the specific transactions, the specific dates, the specific institutions. There was very little room for interpretation. Bennett's attorney called Nathalie's attorney within 6 hours. His attorney called again the following morning. By the end of the week, the word settlement had been used several times by people on Bennett's side of the equation. Nathalie did not settle. Not immediately. This was not vindictiveness, or not only vindictiveness, though she was willing to admit to herself, privately, that there was some of that, but strategy. She had learned, over 2 decades of running a company, that the person who holds out longest in a negotiation tends to be the person who walks away with more. She was right. By the end of the 2nd month, the settlement she received was everything she had asked for, and several things she hadn't. The Connecticut house, full buyout of Bennett's nominal stake in Ashworth Capital, at a valuation that reflected its actual compensation for the transferred funds with interest. She did not ask for the brooch in the settlement. She didn't need to. On the Tuesday after the gala, 4 days after that conversation at table 12, a cream-colored box had arrived at Suzanne's office. Inside was the brooch, wrapped in tissue paper. There was no note, just the piece itself, the antique gold, the sapphires, the central bust. Home. Nathalie had held it for a long time when Suzanne brought it to her. She had not cried then either. But she had felt something shift somewhere deep in her chest, something that had been clenched for a long time, finally releasing. There was a longer story, she knew, about Delia Foss, a woman who had made a choice, and then, at table 12 of the Whitmore Gala, made a different one. Nathalie did not follow what became of her. She wished her no harm. She wished her, in a complicated and genuine way, something better than she had found in this particular chapter. As for Bennett, Bennett was Bennett. He moved into an apartment in the city and, as far as Nathalie could tell, continued to be charming at dinners, and easy with strangers and someone who left doors open behind him. That was his nature. She had loved his nature once. She no longer needed to be inside it. The Ashworth Capital annual report that year listed, for the first time, Nathalie Ashworth as sole managing director. It was a change that required, technically, about 6 paragraphs of legalese in a filing that almost no one would read. She read it. She sat at her desk on the 31st floor, with the city moving below her. The taxis, the pedestrians, the whole ordinary machinery of the world, and she read those 6 paragraphs 3 times. Outside, the morning was clear. The kind of clear that happens in the city in early autumn, when the air shifts and everything becomes slightly more defined than it was the day before, edges sharper, colors truer. She had always loved this city. She had built her life here. She had built her company here, and her family here, and then watched part of it taken apart by someone she had trusted with all of it. She was not starting over. That was not the right frame. She was continuing, without the weight she had been carrying, without the presence she had been accommodating, without the version of herself that had set aside questions she should have asked years earlier. She picked up her coffee. It was for once still warm. She had the company. She had the house. She had the brooch in the drawer of her bedside table, where it would stay until she decided where it truly belonged. Probably with her daughter eventually, the thought of which made her feel, unexpectedly, something almost like peace. She had built this, all of it, and now, finally, it was only hers.